The C-130's ramp lowered with a hydraulic groan, vomiting a blast of frigid, razor-thin air into the cargo bay. Master Sergeant Elara Vance stood motionless, a solitary figure amidst pallets of rations and ammunition. Outside, the world was a brutalist masterpiece of gray rock and blinding white snow. Forward Operating Base Kestrel, perched at 12,000 feet in a forgotten corner of a forgotten mountain range, looked less like a military outpost and more like a scar gouged into the planet's skin. The wind howled a constant, mournful dirge. She was the last one off. The handful of replacement grunts who had shared the flight had already scurried off the ramp, heads ducked against the wind, their youth and anxiety a palpable static in the air. Elara descended the ramp with a steady, unhurried gait. Her pack was perfectly balanced, her weapon held at a low ready, her posture betraying none of the debilitating effects of the high altitude that had the younger soldiers gasping. She was 53, a fact her file stated plainly but her presence denied. Her face was a network of fine lines, not of age, but of weather and concentration, etched around eyes the color of a winter sky. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a severe, regulation bun. There was an economy to her every movement, a complete absence of wasted energy that made her seem both older and infinitely more dangerous than anyone else on the tarmac. A corporal with a clipboard and a chapped, resentful face met her at the bottom. "Vance?" he barked over the wind. Elara gave a single, short nod. "Quartermaster's office. Building Gamma. Follow the yellow line." He pointed a gloved thumb toward a faded painted stripe on the frozen earth before turning his attention to the cargo pallets. His duty to her already complete. He didn't offer to help with her gear. He didn't need to. She hefted her duffel and pack as if they were weightless and began the walk. FOB Kestrel was a study in temporary permanence. HESCO barriers, stained with rust and dirt, formed the arteries of the base. Buildings were a mix of prefabricated containers and tents, fabric skin structures that shuddered violently in the wind. Soldiers moved in bundled clumps, their faces obscured by goggles and balaclavas, their humanity stripped away by the hostile environment. They glanced at her as she passed. They saw a senior NCO, female, older than their mothers, assigned to a supply depot. Their eyes registered her, categorized her, and dismissed her in a single uninterested sweep, an administrative fossil being put out to pasture in a place where no one important would have to look at her. She found Building Gamma, a long, low container that hummed with the sound of overworked heaters. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of canvas, grease, and stale coffee. A young specialist, no older than 20, looked up from a battered desk. "Master Sergeant Vance." "That's me." Her voice was low, gravelly from the dry air. "I'm Specialist Diaz. Welcome to Kestrel, I guess." He gestured vaguely at the cavernous space behind him. "This is it. The whole kingdom. Rations, ammo, boots, toilet paper. If they need it, we hoard it." He handed her a key. "Your quarters are in Delta Block. Bunks open. This here's your desk." He indicated a metal desk identical to his own, only emptier. Elara set her gear down. She didn't look at the desk. Her eyes were scanning the depot. She saw the way the heavy-duty shelving was bolted to the floor, noted the slight sag in one of the central beams. She saw the disorganized stacks of ammunition crates too close to the flammable materials. She saw the fire extinguishers, their inspection tags 3 months out of date. Her gaze lingered for a second on the main door, noting the model of the electronic lock and the unreinforced hinges. She stored it all away without comment. "Colonel Thorne will want to see you," Diaz said, interrupting her silent inventory. "The base commander. Standard procedure for all new senior NCOs. His office is in the TOC. Big round building. Can't miss it." Elara nodded. "Thank you, Specialist." She placed her weapon in the small arms locker, her movements precise and practiced. She took a moment to look at her new desk. It was a blank slate, place to wait, but Elara Vance had never been good at waiting. Colonel Eris Thorne prided himself on efficiency. His office, a small partitioned space within the constant low-level hum of the Tactical Operations Center, was a monument to it. His desk was clear save for a ruggedized laptop, a single mug of black coffee, and the personnel file for the new master sergeant. He flicked through the digital pages, his brow furrowed in annoyance. The file was a ghost. Commendations were listed, but the citations were blacked out. Service history showed deployments to every major and minor conflict of the last 30 years, but the unit assignments were redacted, replaced with sterile codes that meant nothing. There was a single grainy photo from a decade ago, and the basic, unchangeable facts: Vance Alara, Master Sergeant, age, 53, current assignment, Quartermaster, FOB Kestrel. Thorne leaned back, the fabric of his chair creaking in protest. A 53-year-old supply sergeant. They were using his command as a retirement home. Kestrel was a high-tempo, high-risk assignment. His soldiers were young, tough, acclimated to the altitude and the constant threat of insurgent activity. He needed warriors, not warehouse managers on their last tour before a pension. The redacted file was an old trick. Some paper pusher at high command trying to make a REMF look like a hero to justify a comfortable final assignment. He closed the file with a dismissive click. There was a sharp, precise knock at his door. "Enter," he called out, his voice sharp with irritation. Master Sergeant Vance stepped inside. She closed the door quietly behind her, her movements economical. She stood at parade rest, her posture perfect, her gaze fixed on a point on the wall just over his shoulder. She was exactly as the file's photo had suggested, only with more lines around her eyes and an unnerving stillness that wasn't captured on paper. "Master Sergeant Vance," Thorne began, not bothering to stand. He gestured to the file on his screen. "I've been reviewing your file. It's sparse." "Yes, sir," she replied. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "It says here you're to be my new head of supply," Thorne continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "Frankly, Master Sergeant, this isn't Fort Bragg. We don't have the luxury of carrying personnel who are just running out the clock. This is a forward operating base. Every hand here needs to be able to fight. Are you still capable of that?" It was a direct, insulting challenge to her fitness and relevance. A flicker of something cold and hard passed through Alara's eyes, a glacial shift so subtle Thorne almost missed it. But it was there, and then it was gone, replaced by the same unnerving calm. "I can manage the supply depot, Colonel." "That's not what I asked," Thorne pressed, enjoying this. He wanted to see a crack. He wanted her to get flustered, to defend herself. "I asked if you can fight. The last thing I need is a liability when the shooting starts. This is a young man's game, Master Sergeant." Alara's gaze finally dropped from the wall and met his. Her eyes were clear, direct, and utterly unimpressed. For a moment, Thorne felt like a specimen under a microscope. "My record, redacted as it is, speaks for itself," she said, her voice still quiet, yet carrying an undeniable weight. "I will perform my assigned duties to the best of my ability. And I will not be a liability." The finality in her tone was absolute. There was no anger, no defensiveness. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with the certainty of a physicist explaining gravity. It irritated Thorne even more. He wanted to push, to demand answers about the blacked-out sections of her file, but something in her unwavering stare stopped him. It wasn't insubordination, but it was a clear, unspoken boundary. "Fine," he snapped, turning his attention back to his screen in a clear gesture of dismissal. "See to your depot. Don't let me see your name on a sick call report." "Dismissed." Alara didn't reply. She executed a perfect about-face and walked out, closing the door with the same quiet precision as before. Thorne stared at the closed door, a sour taste in his mouth. He felt a prickle of unease he couldn't quite name. He had meant to put her in her place, to establish his authority. Instead, he felt as if he had just thrown a rock at a mountain and the mountain hadn't even noticed. He shook his head, dismissing the feeling. She was just a supply clerk, an old one at that. She would count boxes and stay out of the way, and in a year she'd be gone. He had more important things to worry about. Alara's days settled into a rhythm dictated not by the clock, but by a deep, ingrained sense of order. She didn't just manage the supply depot, she remade it. The first week, she worked from before dawn until long after the generators kicked into their nightly groan. Often alone, Specialist Diaz watching with a mixture of awe and confusion. She didn't bark orders. She simply worked, and the sheer, relentless efficiency of her labor was a command in itself. The disorganized shelves were stripped, inventoried, and reorganized with a logician's precision. Ammunition was moved to a separate, reinforced section at the far end of the container. Flammable materials were isolated. Every box was stenciled with clear, bold lettering. She created a new digital inventory system from scratch, cross-referencing it with a meticulously handwritten ledger. Within 10 days, what had been a chaotic mess became a model of military logistics. But her work was only a cover for her true occupation: observation. While her hands were busy sorting medical supplies or cataloging spare vehicle parts, her mind was constantly in motion. Her senses extended to the entire perimeter of the base. She learned the patterns of the wind, how it funneled through certain ravines and created treacherous eddies along the southern ridge. She committed the patrol schedules to memory, not just the official routes on the map, but the slight deviations the tired soldiers made, the corners they cut on their way back to the wire. From the small, grimy window of the depot, she had a clear view of Watchtower 4. She noted its blind spots, a small depression to the southwest, a cluster of rocks to the east. She watched the guards, saw how their vigilance waned during the middle of their shifts, how they'd hunch against the cold. Their eyes focused more on staying warm than on the barren landscape. She memorized the terrain outside the HESCO barriers, every rock, every dip, every potential piece of cover or concealment. She wasn't just looking. She was mapping, analyzing, gaming out scenarios. Where would an attack come from? How would they use the terrain? Where were the perimeter's weaknesses? Her quiet intensity did not go unnoticed. Lieutenant Kenji Tanaka, a young, sharp-eyed platoon leader, would often find excuses to visit the depot for supplies he didn't really need. He was a student of military history and tactics, and he saw something in the old master sergeant that others missed. He saw the way her eyes never stopped moving, the way she assessed every person who entered her depot with a quick, comprehensive glance. He once watched her field strip and clean her rifle. Her hands moved with a fluid, practiced grace that was mesmerizing. Each component disassembled, wiped, oiled, and reassembled without a single wasted motion. It wasn't the work of a supply clerk. It was the ingrained muscle memory of a lifelong operator. "Master Sergeant," he said one afternoon, leaning against a crate of MREs, "you run a tight ship." Alara looked up from her ledger, her expression neutral. "Order reduces chaos, Lieutenant. Chaos gets people killed." "My grandfather used to say something like that," Tanaka mused. "He flew helicopters in another war. Said you had to know your machine so well you could feel it thinking." He watched her for a moment. "The way you handle that rifle. You didn't learn that in a quartermaster course." Alara closed the ledger. "We all learn what we need to survive, Lieutenant." She turned away, her message clear. The conversation was over. She extended her observations beyond the base. During her allotted personal time, she didn't retreat to her bunk to read or write letters. She would stand near the perimeter fence, seemingly just staring at the mountains, a lone figure braving the biting wind. But she was studying the light, watching how shadows stretched and shortened across the valleys, identifying natural lines of drift where snow would accumulate. She was listening to the silence, learning to distinguish the sound of the wind from the distant fall of loose rock or the cry of a snow leopard. She was becoming a part of the landscape, absorbing its secrets into her own quiet depths. The soldiers saw an old woman staring at the hills. She saw a battlefield, and she knew, with the chilling certainty of experience, that the battlefield would soon demand its due. The pressure began as a whisper. The wind, always a constant presence at FOB Kestrel, changed its tune. Its mournful howl deepened into a guttural, menacing roar. The sky, usually a vast, indifferent blue, curdled into a bruised, oppressive gray. Meteorologists at high command had predicted a storm, but their forecasts, made from the comfort of a climate-controlled room 1,000 miles away, failed to capture the raw, violent reality of a high-altitude blizzard. Snow began to fall not in gentle flakes, but in horizontal sheets of blinding white, driven by hurricane-force gusts. Within an hour, visibility dropped to less than 5 feet. The world shrank to a maelstrom of wind and ice. Inside the TOC, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The low hum of electronics was drowned out by the shriek of the storm outside and the increasingly frantic shouts of men. "Comms are down!" a specialist yelled, his voice cracking. "I've got nothing but static on all channels. Satellite link is gone." Colonel Thorne stood over the central holographic map table, his knuckles white where he gripped its edge. "What about Bravo 7? What's their last known position?" "5 clicks out, sir, near checkpoint Zulu," Lieutenant Tanaka answered, his face pale. "They were on their way back in. They reported heavy snow and then nothing. That was 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes in a storm like this was a death sentence." The temperature had plummeted to 30 below zero, with a wind chill that was exponentially worse. Panic, cold and sharp, began to snake its way through the command center. Thorne barked orders, his voice strained. "Get me a long-range antenna array powered up. I want every comms tech we have working on this. Somebody get me a sit rep on the backup generators." His orders were futile. No antenna could punch through this much atmospheric interference. The backup generators were already running, but they couldn't fix a dead satellite link. The men scrambled to obey, their movements jerky and inefficient, a reflection of their commander's rising panic. Thorne was a capable officer in predictable circumstances, but this was chaos, a force of nature that didn't adhere to regulations or respect his rank. He was losing control, and he knew it. He stared at the map, at the blinking icon that marked Bravo 7's last known location, as if his gaze alone could will them back to safety. His mind raced through the protocols, the emergency procedures, but they were all useless. He couldn't send a rescue team into a complete whiteout. It would be suicide. He would just be sending more men out to die. All he could do was wait for the storm to break, and by then, it would be too late. He was helpless. While the TOC descended into organized chaos, Alara Vance was in the supply depot, conducting her final checks of the evening. She heard the rising scream of the wind, felt the entire building shudder with each powerful gust. Specialist Diaz was nervously pacing, his eyes wide. "I've never seen it like this, Master Sergeant. It's like the whole world is ending." Alara walked to the small, reinforced window and looked out into the swirling vortex of white. She could see nothing, but she didn't need to. She had the map of the surrounding terrain etched into her memory. She knew the wind patterns. She knew the patrol routes. She knew the men of Bravo 7, having issued them their cold weather gear just that morning. She knew their leader, Sergeant Miller, a steady NCO but one who sometimes relied too heavily on his GPS. A GPS that was now undoubtedly useless. She stood there for a full minute, her mind a silent, powerful computer processing dozens of variables. The wind direction, the patrol's expected speed, the topography of the area around checkpoint Zulu, the natural shelters the terrain might offer, the likely failure points of their equipment. A cold, clear certainty settled in her mind. She knew. Without a word to Diaz, she turned from the window and walked to a small, locked cabinet. She opened it and began to assemble a small pack with swift, economical movements. A medical kit, high-energy ration bars, spare batteries, a thermal blanket, a flare gun, and a small, insulated thermos she filled with hot, sugared tea from a pot she kept simmering on a hot plate. She slung the pack over her shoulder. From a drawer in her desk, she retrieved a simple, old-fashioned magnetic compass and a laminated topographical map. She put on her own extreme cold weather gear, her movements calm and deliberate, a stark contrast to the frantic energy gripping the rest of the base. She checked her sidearm, chambered a round, and holstered it securely. Finally, she turned to the pale, confused specialist. "Keep the depot secure, Diaz," she said. Her voice was steady, a rock in the screaming storm. Then she walked out the door and into the blizzard, heading directly for the TOC. The door to the TOC hissed open, admitting a swirling gust of snow and a single parka-clad figure. Heads turned. For a moment, no one recognized the bundled form. Then Alara Vance pulled down her goggles and hood, revealing her stark, determined face. She walked directly to the central map table, the snow melting from her gear and puddling on the floor. The frantic energy in the room seemed to falter, silenced by her sudden, calm presence. She ignored the stares, her focus entirely on Colonel Thorne. She laid her laminated map on top of the glowing holographic display, the analog overlaying the digital. It was a jarring contrast. She placed a gloved finger on a specific point on the map, a location nearly 2 kilometers east of Bravo 7's last known position. "They are here," she stated. It wasn't a suggestion or a theory. It was a declaration. Thorne stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What in the hell are you doing in my TOC, Master Sergeant?" Alara didn't flinch. She tapped the map again. "Checkpoint Zulu is on an exposed ridge. The wind is coming from the west-northwest. There's a funnel in that sector. No one could survive on that ridge. Sergeant Miller is a good NCO. He would seek shelter." Her finger traced a path down from the ridge. "This ravine is the only significant depression in the area deep enough to offer a windbreak. They would have moved east, keeping the rock wall to their left, until they found it. Their radio is likely frozen solid. The battery would have died within minutes in this temperature. They are conserving body heat and waiting." Thorne's jaw tightened. The sheer audacity of it. A supply clerk, an old woman, waltzing into his command center during a crisis to tell him how to do his job. All his earlier resentment toward her boiled over. "You know this, do you? Based on what? A weather forecast you cooked up while counting socks." "Based on observation," Alara said, her voice still level, betraying no hint of anger. "I have been watching the wind patterns in that sector for 3 weeks. I know the terrain. They are in that ravine, Colonel. But their window is closing. Hypothermia is not patient." "That's enough," Thorne roared, his authority challenged in front of his entire command staff. "I will not risk a rescue team based on your geriatric guesswork. Get out of my TOC now. That is a direct order." The room was thick with a tense, embarrassed silence. The other officers and NCOs avoided looking at either Thorne or Alara. They were caught between their panicked, flailing commander and this strangely confident Master Sergeant. Thorne's face was red, his chest heaving. He pointed a trembling finger toward the door. But before Alara could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Sir, wait." It was Lieutenant Tanaka. He stepped forward, his expression earnest. All eyes shifted to him. To contradict a commanding officer in the middle of a crisis, especially one as enraged as Thorne, was a career-ending move. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Thorne bit out, his glare shifting to his subordinate. Tanaka took a deep breath. "Sir, with all due respect, what the Master Sergeant is saying makes tactical sense." He looked at Alara's map, then at the larger holographic display. The topographical data supports her analysis. That ravine is the most logical shelter in the entire quadrant. Standard cold weather doctrine dictates seeking leeward shelter immediately during whiteout conditions. Her projection of their movement is sound. Thorne looked at Tanaka as if he'd grown a second head. "Are you questioning my judgment, Lieutenant?" "No, sir," Tanaka said, his voice steady despite the immense pressure. "I'm presenting a viable option when we currently have none. We can't get a thermal read through the storm. We have no communications. This is the only actionable intelligence we have." "It's a lead, sir. It's our only lead." A murmur went through the room. Tanaka's logic was irrefutable. They could sit here and do nothing, guaranteeing Bravo 7's demise, or they could act on this one sliver of hope, however unconventional its source. Thorne was trapped. His pride warred with the dawning, terrifying realization that the lieutenant and the old woman were right. To do nothing now would be an abdication of his command. He stared at Alara, his eyes narrowed. He hated this, He hated being cornered. Fine, he spat out, the word tasting like ash. Fine. I'll authorize a two-man search team. A reconnaissance element only. He jabbed a finger at Alara. You're so sure? You'll go. You'll guide them. It was a punishment. A way for him to save face. If she was wrong, she would face the consequences. Then he turned to the most formidable-looking NCO in the room, a burly sergeant first class named Marcus Cole. Cole was Thorne's man, a fiercely loyal and competent infantryman. Sergeant Cole, Thorne commanded. You will go with her. Your mission is to verify her claim. If there is any sign of the patrol, you report back immediately. You do not engage in a full rescue without my authorization. And your primary objective, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone as he stared at Alara, is to make sure the master sergeant doesn't get herself or you killed. You are her babysitter. Is that clear? Crystal clear, sir, Cole said, his face an unreadable mask. He looked at Alara, his gaze professional but laced with the same skepticism as his commander's. He saw an old woman who was about to lead him on a fool's errand into the heart of a killer storm. Alara simply nodded, pulling her hood back up. She had her permission. That was all that mattered. The colonel's petty insults were just noise, as meaningless as the howling of the wind. The mission was everything. The moment they stepped outside the TOC, the world dissolved into a roaring, featureless hell. The wind hit like a physical blow, stealing their breath and driving ice crystals into every exposed pore of their skin. Sergeant Cole, a mountain of a man clad in the best cold-weather gear the army could issue, immediately felt the brutal power of the storm and a surge of doubt. Beside him, Alara Vance moved with an unnerving purpose, her head slightly bowed, her steps sure and steady on the treacherous, snow-covered ground. She was a small, dark shape against the infinite white, yet she seemed utterly at home in the chaos. They met the third member of their team, a young corporal named Davies, at the motor pool. Davies was a medic, his face pale with a mixture of fear and duty. Cole did a quick gear check, his movements brusque and efficient. He trusted his equipment and he trusted himself. He did not trust the old woman who now held his life and Davies's in her hands. All right, Master Sergeant, he shouted over the gale. Lead the way. Alara didn't waste breath on a reply. She simply turned and began walking toward the main gate, navigating by an internal compass that seemed immune to the disorienting whiteout. They passed through the wire, the gate sentries looking on with expressions of pity and disbelief. Then they were alone, three small figures swallowed by the storm. For the first kilometer, Cole tried to keep his own bearings, using his wrist-mounted GPS. The device was useless. The screen flickered erratically, unable to acquire a satellite lock. He was flying blind. He was forced to rely completely on Alara. She didn't use a compass, not yet. She seemed to navigate by the feel of the wind on her face, the angle of the unseen slope beneath her feet, the subtle changes in the texture of the snow. She moved at a relentless, energy-conserving pace, never too fast, never too slow. Cole and Davies, both half her age and in peak physical condition, found themselves struggling to keep up without becoming winded in the thin, frigid air. How can she even see? Davies yelled, his voice snatched away by the wind. She can't, Cole yelled back. She's guessing. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. There was a certainty in her movements that defied logic. She wasn't wandering. She was tracking. After 40 minutes that felt like an eternity, she finally stopped. She knelt, brushing away a foot of fresh snow to reveal the faintest of impressions underneath, the partial track of a boot, almost completely scoured away by the wind. Miller's patrol, she said, her voice calm and clear despite the roaring wind. They came this way, she pointed into the swirling abyss. The ravine is 500 meters ahead. Cole stared at the track, then at her. A sliver of doubt in his own skepticism began to form. Finding that single track in these conditions was impossible. It wasn't luck. It was expertise of a kind he had never witnessed. He nodded grimly. Okay, let's move. They found them exactly where she had said they would be. Huddled in a deep, narrow cut in the rock, Bravo 7 was a collection of ghostly, snow-covered mounds. They had formed a tight circle to share body heat, but they were fading fast. Sergeant Miller was barely conscious, his words slurring from advanced hypothermia. Alara was a whirlwind of calm efficiency. While Cole and Davies checked vitals, she was already distributing the contents of her pack. She forced the hot, sweet tea from her thermos down Miller's throat, the sugar and heat a jolt to his system. She wrapped the most critical soldier in the thermal blanket. She assessed their conditions with a medic's practiced eye, her hands sure and steady. "We need to get them moving," she said to Cole. "Now. They won't last another hour. Even here." Getting the 7 men of Bravo 7 back on their feet was a Herculean effort. They were weak, disoriented, their limbs stiff with cold. The return journey was a slow, brutal slog. They were a chain of staggering bodies, linked together by rope, with Alara at the front, a human anchor against the storm's fury. They were less than a click from the base, the faint, diffused glow of Kestrel's perimeter lights just barely visible, when the world erupted. The distinct, sharp crack of a Dragunov sniper rifle cut through the howl of the wind, and a geyser of snow and rock exploded inches from Cole's head. Ambush. Insurgents, using the storm for cover, had crept right up to the wire. Cole's training took over. "Contact front!" he screamed, shoving Davies and one of the hypothermic soldiers to the ground. He brought his rifle up, but he couldn't see anything. The muzzle flashes were invisible in the whiteout. It was a perfect ambush. They were blind, exposed, and slowed by their rescued comrades. Then, something moved in his peripheral vision. It was Alara. In the instant between the sniper shot and Cole's shout, she had reacted. There was no hesitation, no fear. One moment she was their guide, the next she was a predator. She dropped her pack and drew her sidearm in a single, fluid motion. She didn't fire wildly into the storm. She stood still for a second, her head cocked as if listening to something only she could hear. Another shot cracked, and this time she moved. She fired twice, 2 precise, controlled shots. Pop, pop. The sound was small, almost insignificant against the roar of the wind. But through the swirling snow, Cole saw a dark shape, a figure he hadn't even registered on a rock outcropping 60 yards away, simply collapse and disappear. A third shot came from a different direction, closer. Before Cole could even pivot, Alara had dropped to one knee, switched her sidearm to her left hand, and drawn the combat knife from her belt with her right. A figure burst out of the snow, charging at her, rifle raised. He was 10 feet away. He never got to 5. Alara didn't block or parry. She moved inside his reach, a blur of motion. Her knife hand flashed once, a short, brutal arc. The insurgent made a wet, choking sound and fell face first into the snow, his rifle clattering beside him. Silence returned, broken only by the wind. 2 threats neutralized in less than 5 seconds. Cole and Davies stared, utterly dumbfounded. They hadn't even gotten a target acquired. The sheer speed, precision, and lethality were terrifying. It was a level of combat efficiency that didn't exist in the conventional army. It was something else entirely. Alara stood up, calmly retrieved her knife, and wiped it clean on the dead man's uniform before sheathing it. She holstered her pistol. She turned back to the stunned group, her expression as placid as if she had just finished a routine drill. "The perimeter is that way," she said, pointing. "Let's get these men inside." She picked up her pack and resumed her position at the front of the line, leaving Sergeant Cole and Corporal Davies to stare at the 2 dead insurgents, their minds struggling to reconcile the image of the quiet, elderly supply sergeant with the stone-cold killer they had just witnessed. The infirmary was a controlled frenzy of activity. Medics moved with urgent purpose, stripping frozen clothing, administering IVs, and wrapping the shivering men of Bravo 7 in heated blankets. The smell of antiseptic and relief filled the air. Colonel Thorne stood in the doorway, his face a complex tapestry of shock, relief, and profound confusion. His men were alive. They were alive because of the woman he had dismissed, the woman who now stood quietly to one side, methodically cleaning the grime from her sidearm. Sergeant Cole had already given his verbal report, his voice strained with an awe he couldn't conceal. He described her navigation, her medical aid, and then, in clipped, precise terms, the ambush. 2 hostiles neutralized. Minimal fuss. Maximum violence. Thorne walked over to Alara, his boots loud on the linoleum floor. The medics and rescued soldiers fell silent, watching. "Master Sergeant," Thorne began, his voice hoarse. "What you did out there." He trailed off, unable to find the words. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He didn't see an old woman. He saw a weapon. "Who are you?" he finally asked, the question raw and direct. Before Alara could answer, a comms specialist burst into the infirmary. "Sir, we've got a connection. High Command is on a secure channel. General Hassan wants a welfare check and a sit-rep on the storm. Put him through to the TOC," Thorne ordered, his mind still reeling. "I'll be right there." He looked at Alara again. "You're coming with me." In the TOC, the frantic energy had been replaced by a stunned, sober silence. The faces of the command staff showed the same mixture of gratitude and bewilderment that Thorne felt. On the main view screen, the face of General Omar Hassan, a 4-star officer with a legendary reputation, appeared. He looked tired but relieved. "Eris," the general's voice boomed from the speakers. "Glad to see you're still in one piece. Report." Thorne cleared his throat and gave a concise summary of the last few hours. The storm, the lost patrol, the rescue. He stumbled slightly when he got to the part about who had led the mission. "The rescue was led by Master Sergeant Alara Vance," he said, the name feeling strange on his tongue. "She located the patrol and guided the team back. There was an incident on the return. 2 enemy combatants were neutralized by Master Sergeant Vance." On the screen, General Hassan's expression shifted from relief to intense curiosity. He went still. "Vance? Master Sergeant Alara Vance? Did you say?" "Yes, General," Thorne confirmed. A long silence stretched. The general leaned forward, his eyes boring into the camera. "Eris, I need a visual. Put her on the screen." Thorne hesitated, then gestured for Alara to step forward. She moved into the camera's view, her face impassive. She had a small burn on her left forearm from where she had brushed against a hot generator casing while helping a medic, and her uniform sleeve was slightly torn and pushed up from the firefight. Through the tear, a small section of scarred skin was visible. General Hassan stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. His voice, when he spoke, was a whisper of pure awe. "Master Sergeant Vance," he said, the sound reverent. Are you Wraith?" The name hung in the air like a physical entity. Wraith. It wasn't a name, it was a myth. A ghost story told in hushed tones by intelligence officers and special forces operators. A solo operative from a unit so secret it didn't officially exist, Task Force Chimera. A legend credited with dozens of impossible missions. A figure who could walk through walls and vanish into thin air. A specter of the battlefield. Colonel Thorne's blood ran cold. The redacted file. The impossible skills. It all slammed into place. As if on cue, a medic hurried over to Alara in the TOC. "Master Sergeant, let me see to that burn." He gently took her arm. As he applied a salve, he pushed her sleeve up further to get a better look, inadvertently rolling it past her elbow. And there they were. The entire TOC drew a collective breath. Exposed on her forearm was a horrific, mesmerizing tapestry of scar tissue. It was a lattice of old, silvery burn marks interwoven with the deep, puckered lines of healed lacerations. It wasn't a random collection of injuries. It was a pattern, a unique and terrible signature. On the screen, General Hassan leaned so close his face filled the frame. He had seen debrief photos. He had read the classified after-action reports that were meant to be burned after reading. He whispered to an aide just off camera, his voice low but picked up clearly by the sensitive TOC microphone. "Holy SHT. Are those the Kandahar burns?" The whisper was a thunderclap in the silent room. The Kandahar burns. the most famous part of the Wraith legend, the story of a black site in Kandahar province, overrun by an overwhelming enemy force. A lone operative, presumed to be Wraith, had held them off single-handedly, fighting room to room in a desperate, brutal close-quarters battle. To prevent catastrophic intelligence from being captured, the operative had rigged the facility's fuel depot to blow, setting the entire compound ablaze and using the inferno as cover to escape. They said the operative had been badly burned and cut to ribbons by shrapnel, but had still managed to carry a wounded analyst 2 miles to a clandestine extraction point. The scars were supposed to be the only proof the event had ever even happened, and they were right there on the arm of his new quartermaster sergeant. The revelation settled over the tactical operations center like a physical weight, crushing all sound, all motion. Every soldier in the room, from the lowest-ranking comms specialist to the most senior officer, stood frozen, their eyes locked on Master Sergeant Alara Vance. They weren't just looking at a senior NCO anymore. They were looking at a living legend, a ghost made flesh. The quiet, older woman who organized their supplies was a figure of myth, a warrior of a caliber most of them could barely comprehend. The air crackled with a mixture of shock, awe, and a profound, dawning sense of shame for how they had misjudged her. Colonel Eris Thorne felt the weight most acutely. His earlier condescension, his dismissive words, his petty challenge to her abilities. It all came rushing back to him, tasting like poison. He had called her a liability. He had accused her of running out the clock. He had stood in the path of a tidal wave and mocked it for being water. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over him, followed by a wave of something else. An overwhelming, absolute respect. He moved without conscious thought. His body, trained by 3 decades of military discipline, knew what to do when in the presence of undeniable greatness. He walked across the TOC floor until he stood directly in front of her. He didn't speak. Words were inadequate, insulting. He simply drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and rendered the sharpest, most impeccably correct salute of his entire career. It wasn't the perfunctory gesture of a superior to a subordinate. It was a tribute, an apology, an acknowledgement of a warrior. Alara looked up from the medic who was now nervously finishing his work. Her pale eyes met Thorne's. There was no triumph in her gaze, no hint of "I told you so." There was only a quiet, weary acceptance. She gave him a single, short, crisp nod. It was all the acknowledgement he needed, and more than he deserved. The colonel's salute was a signal. One by one, like a current passing through the room, the other soldiers reacted. Lieutenant Tanaka, his face filled with vindicated admiration, snapped to attention and saluted. Sergeant Marcus Cole, the man sent to babysit her, rendered a salute so fierce his hand trembled slightly. The comm specialists, the intel analysts, the junior officers, every single person in the room stood, turned to face her, and offered a silent, unified salute. The only sounds were the hum of the electronics and the faint, lingering howl of the wind outside. It was a silent, powerful chorus of respect, offered freely and without reservation. This was her true commendation, written not on paper with redacted ink, but on the faces of the soldiers she had saved. In the days that followed, the storm broke, and the sun returned to bleach the snow-covered peaks of the Hindu Kush. FOB Kestrel returned to its routine, but the base's internal atmosphere had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. The name Wraith was never spoken aloud. The story of the Kandahar burns was never repeated. It didn't need to be. The knowledge settled deep into the base's collective consciousness, a shared secret that altered every interaction. Alara Vance went back to her supply depot. She resumed her inventory, organized her ledgers, and oversaw the distribution of parts and rations. On the surface, nothing had changed. She was still the quartermaster sergeant. But everything had changed. Soldiers who used to walk past her without a glance now met her eyes and gave a respectful nod. The younger ones, especially the infantry grunts, began to find excuses to visit the depot. They wouldn't ask about the legends or the past. They knew better. Instead, they would ask for advice, their questions carefully phrased. "Master Sergeant, What's the best way to zero a rifle in high winds? Master Sergeant, could you show me a better way to pack my aid kit? Master Sergeant, I was looking at this map. What's the quickest way through this terrain on foot? She would answer each question patiently. Her advice always practical, concise, and devastatingly effective. She would demonstrate a weapon hold, suggest a better route, or show them how to read the subtle signs of the weather. She became their quiet mentor, a silent guardian passing on fragments of her hard-won wisdom. Colonel Thorne came to the depot one afternoon. He stood awkwardly for a moment watching her work. "Alara," he said, using her first name for the first time. "I have an opening. Tactical advisor for base operations. It's yours if you want it. Command position. You'd answer only to me." Alara finished stenciling a crate before she looked up. "Thank you, Colonel," she said, her voice polite but firm. "But my assigned duties are here. This is where I'm needed." She preferred the quiet order of her depot, the tangible reality of her work. She had no desire for a title or a position of authority. She had spent a lifetime in the shadows, and she had found a strange peace in this quiet, overlooked corner of the world. Thorne understood. He simply nodded. "If you ever need anything at all, my door is open." It was the highest form of respect he could offer. The story ends not with a bang, but with a quiet image. It is dusk. The sky is a deep, bruised purple, and the jagged peaks of the mountains are silhouetted against the last vestiges of light. The wind is calm, a mere whisper. Alara Vance stands alone near the western perimeter fence, looking out not at the base, but away from it, toward the vast, empty wilderness. Her hands are tucked into her pockets, her posture relaxed but aware. Her scars are hidden again beneath the sleeves of her uniform, but their presence is a palpable force, an invisible shield that now extends over the entire outpost. The soldiers on watch in the towers see her, and they stand a little straighter. They check their sectors with a little more diligence. They know the ghost is watching. She is a sentinel, a quiet guardian who asked for nothing and earned everything. She sought no glory, but she had found something far more valuable. A quiet place to stand her watch, her dignity intact, her earned respect the only armor she would ever need.